Before this story begins, subscribe to the channel and type Amen in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon, and don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The scorching July afternoon cast dancing heat waves across the cracked asphalt of Maple Street, where 7-year-old Charlotte sat exhausted against the weathered brick wall of Murphy's abandoned grocery store. Her thin arms wrapped protectively around 3-year-old twin sisters, Mia and Zoe, both crying softly from hunger and the oppressive heat that seemed to radiate from every surface around them. The girls' worn clothes clung to their small bodies with perspiration, and Charlotte's blonde hair hung in damp strands around her flushed face, evidence of their long journey through the sweltering city streets. Charlotte shifted uncomfortably on the scorching sidewalk, trying to shield the twins from the harsh sun with her own small body, while battling her own exhaustion and growing desperation. They had been walking for nearly 3 hours now, attempting to reach Davidson Pharmacy on the other side of town to get the critical antibiotics for their mother, who had been bedridden with worsening pneumonia for 3 agonizing days. The prescription slip was folded carefully in Charlotte's pocket, along with the $17.34 she had painstakingly collected from searching couch cushions, empty jars, her ceramic piggy bank, and even checking under car seats for forgotten change. The oppressive heat was becoming dangerous for the small children, and Charlotte could see that Mia's cheeks were becoming alarmingly red, while Zoe had stopped crying and was now listlessly leaning against her sister with the kind of quiet that worried Charlotte more than tears. She knew they needed to rest, needed water, needed help, but the pharmacy was still at least 8 blocks away, and she wasn't sure the twins could make it much further in this brutal summer weather. The rumble of an expensive engine broke through the afternoon quiet, its smooth, powerful sound distinctly different from the older, louder vehicles that typically navigated this working-class neighborhood. Charlotte's head snapped up with immediate alarm as a gleaming black Bentley Mulsanne, its chrome accents reflecting the brutal sunlight like mirrors, slowed to a deliberate stop directly across the narrow street from where they sat. The contrast was jarring and somehow threatening. 3 obviously impoverished children in tattered, sweat-stained clothing against the backdrop of obvious wealth and power, rolling up to their moment of desperate vulnerability. Charlotte's small heart began hammering against her ribs with the kind of primal fear that children develop when they've learned too young that the world can be dangerous. She fumbled desperately for their mother's old flip phone, her hands trembling not just with exhaustion but with mounting panic as every warning she had ever heard about strangers in expensive cars came flooding back to her consciousness. She had heard countless stories about children who disappeared, about dangers that lurked even in broad daylight, about predators who targeted vulnerable kids exactly like her and her sisters. "Stay close to me," Charlotte whispered urgently to Mia and Zoe, who instinctively clung to her worn t-shirt with tiny fists, sensing their big sister's fear even if they didn't understand its source. "Don't talk to anyone, okay? Just hold on to me." With fingers shaking from both heat exhaustion and adrenaline, Charlotte dialed the numbers she had memorized since she was 5 years old, numbers their mother had made her practice over and over until they became automatic. "911, what's your emergency?" came the familiar, professionally calm voice through the phone's tinny speaker, a sound that represented safety and help in Charlotte's young mind. "This is Charlotte Miller," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the twins' soft whimpering and the distant sound of the luxury car's air conditioning system running. "I'm on Maple Street by the old Murphy's grocery store that closed down, and a stranger in a really expensive car just stopped here. I have my little sisters with me, and I'm scared because we're all alone and he might be watching us." Her voice cracked on the last few words, revealing the terror she was working so hard to hide behind her brave facade. The dispatcher's tone immediately became more focused and urgently caring, recognizing the genuine fear in the child's voice. "Charlotte, honey, you did absolutely the right thing by calling us. Are you in immediate danger right now? Can you tell me exactly what the person in the car is doing?" Through the Bentley's darkly tinted windows, Charlotte could make out the silhouette of what appeared to be a large man in what looked like an expensive business suit. The car's engine continued running smoothly, its air conditioning system likely providing blessed relief from the heat that was making the girls dizzy and increasingly nauseous. "He's just sitting there in his really fancy black car," Charlotte reported, her voice gaining some strength from the dispatcher's calm, reassuring presence. The windows are too dark to see him clearly, but I can tell he's big. And my mommy always told me to call you right away if strangers tried to talk to us or follow us, especially when we're alone like this. The car door opened with a soft, expensive sound that was almost whisper quiet, and out stepped 32-year-old Marcus Thompson, CEO and founder of Thompson Industries, one of the fastest-growing and most innovative technology companies in the Southeast. His perfectly tailored charcoal gray Armani suit, Italian silk tie in deep blue, and handcrafted leather shoes that probably cost more than most families in this neighborhood spent on groceries in 6 months, seemed to belong to an entirely different universe from this struggling area, where broken dreams and persistent financial hardship had become the unfortunate norm for most residents. Marcus had been returning from what could only be described as a triumphant high-stakes merger, meeting with a consortium of potential Japanese investors who were interested in expanding his artificial intelligence applications into the Asian market. The meeting had gone better than expected, with preliminary agreements that could potentially triple his company's valuation within the next 18 months. He should have been focused entirely on the business implications of the day's success, but something about the 3 small figures huddled against the abandoned building had caught his peripheral vision and compelled him to stop with an urgency he couldn't quite explain. His business instincts, carefully honed by years of reading people, analyzing situations, and making split-second decisions that affected millions of dollars, immediately recognized that this scene was fundamentally wrong. Children, especially children this young, shouldn't be alone on the street in dangerous heat like this, and the protective posture of the older girl, the way she instinctively pulled the smaller ones closer to her body, suggested they were in some kind of serious distress that went beyond simple play or normal childhood activities. As Marcus approached slowly, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against the hot pavement with each deliberate step, he could hear the soft, heartbreaking sounds of the baby's exhausted whimpering and see the way the older girl instinctively pulled them even closer to her body, her thin arms wrapping around them like a shield. The sight triggered something profound and unexpected deep in his chest, awakening a protective instinct he hadn't experienced since his own impoverished childhood in Detroit, before ambition, success, and accumulated wealth had effectively insulated him from this kind of raw, immediate human need. "Hello there," Marcus said as gently as possible, consciously moderating his voice from its usual boardroom authority to something softer and less intimidating. He stopped a respectful distance away to avoid frightening them further, remembering viscerally how overwhelming and threatening adults had seemed when he was small, vulnerable, and dependent on the kindness of strangers. "Are you girls okay? You look like you might need some help, and it's awfully hot out here for anyone to be sitting on the pavement." Charlotte's grip tightened on the phone until her knuckles were white with tension, her body coiled like a spring ready to run if necessary. "He's talking to us now," she reported to the dispatcher, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face as she tried to read his intentions. There was something oddly, inexplicably familiar about his features, the strong, determined jawline, the way his eyebrows drew together in what appeared to be genuine concern, the particular shade of green in his eyes that seemed almost like looking in a mirror, but she couldn't place where she might have encountered him before. And the familiarity somehow made the situation even more unsettling. "Sir, I already called 911, Charlotte announced with more bravery than she actually felt, her small chin lifted in defiance despite the fear coursing through her veins like electricity. "They're sending police officers here right now, so you should probably just leave us alone." Marcus raised both hands in the universal gesture of peace and non-aggression, his expression remaining deliberately calm and reassuring despite the unusual and somewhat accusatory circumstances of their meeting. "That's very smart of you," he said, genuine admiration evident in his voice as he recognized the intelligence and protective instincts this young girl was displaying. "You're being an excellent big sister, protecting them like that. I want you to know that I'm not here to hurt anyone or cause any trouble. I just saw you sitting here in this dangerous heat and wanted to make sure you were safe and had everything you needed. Where are your parents?" "Our mommy is really sick," Charlotte replied, still speaking partly to the dispatcher who was carefully listening to every word of this unexpected encounter. "We were trying to walk all the way to Davidson Pharmacy to get her important medicine, but it's so far away and it's so hot that the baby's got too tired and too hot to keep going." As if responding directly to her words, little Zoe let out a more insistent cry of discomfort, her small face now dangerously red and blotchy from heat exposure and dehydration. The scene struck Marcus like a physical blow to his chest, the reality of their situation hitting him with unexpected force. He had built his empire by reading people and situations with laser-like accuracy, and everything about this encounter screamed of genuine desperation and need, rather than any kind of scam, manipulation, or staged performance. These children were clearly in immediate crisis, and the older girl's remarkably mature handling of an impossible situation spoke to responsibilities and burdens that no 7-year-old should ever have to carry alone. "What kind of medicine does your mother need?" Marcus asked, already pulling out his own phone with the intention of mobilizing whatever resources might be necessary to help. "Maybe I can help arrange to have it delivered directly to your home, or we could give you a safe ride to the pharmacy where it's cool and comfortable." Charlotte hesitated, studying his face with an intensity and analytical focus that reminded Marcus strangely of his own approach to evaluating new business partners. The distant sound of sirens began to echo through the neighborhood streets, growing steadily closer with each passing second. "She has pneumonia," Charlotte admitted quietly, embarrassment and deep worry warring in her young voice. "The doctor at the free clinic said she needs antibiotics really, really bad, but they're expensive," Marcus finished gently, understanding the complete situation immediately from his own childhood experiences. His early years had been filled with remarkably similar moments, watching his own single mother forced to choose between essential medications and groceries, between heating bills and doctor visits, between immediate survival needs and long-term health care. "What's your mother's name, sweetheart?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the kind of genuine care that couldn't be faked. "Sarah Miller," Charlotte replied automatically, then quickly added with renewed caution as her training kicked back in, "But I still don't know if I should be telling you all this personal stuff. Mommy always says never to give strangers our real information." The patrol car rounded the corner just then, its red and blue lights flashing but siren mercifully quiet to avoid creating additional chaos and stress in an already tense situation. Marcus immediately stepped back even further, raising his hands higher in a gesture of complete non-aggression, as Officer Patricia Rodriguez approached with the measured caution and professional alertness of someone who had seen too many situations escalate unexpectedly and dangerously. "Everything all right here?" Officer Rodriguez asked, her experienced hand resting casually but purposefully on her radio as she quickly assessed the scene with trained eyes. Her gaze took in the expensive car, the obviously wealthy businessman, and the 3 clearly distressed children, immediately recognizing the potential for multiple different scenarios ranging from innocent help to something more sinister. "This gentleman stopped his car and said he wanted to help us," Charlotte explained, her voice gaining noticeable strength and confidence now that official help had arrived on the scene. "We were trying to get medicine for our mommy who's really sick, but it's too far to walk in this heat." Marcus reached slowly and deliberately into his jacket pocket, making sure his movements were completely visible and non-threatening, and withdrew his business card, extending it to Officer Rodriguez with careful, measured motions. "Marcus Thompson, Thompson Industries. I was driving by when I noticed these children appeared to be in distress from the heat. I offered to help them obtain their mother's medication safely." Officer Rodriguez examined the embossed business card carefully, recognition flickering in her experienced eyes as she processed the information. Thompson Industries was not only a major employer in the region, providing hundreds of well-paying jobs, but Marcus Thompson's extensive philanthropic efforts were regularly featured in local media coverage. Scholarship funds for underprivileged students, substantial donations to children's hospitals, and numerous community development projects that had revitalized several struggling neighborhoods. "These your daughters, Mr. Thompson?" Officer Rodriguez asked directly, watching his facial expression carefully for any signs of deception, discomfort, or suspicious behavior that might indicate a problematic situation. "No, I've never seen them before today in my life," Marcus replied without the slightest hesitation, though something strange and completely inexplicable tightened in his chest at the question, as if some part of him wished the answer could be different. "I simply couldn't drive past children who so clearly needed help." Charlotte looked back and forth between the 2 adults, her protective instincts still running at full alert, despite the reassuring presence of the uniformed police officer. "Officer Rodriguez, can he really help us get Mommy's medicine? We've been trying for so long and I'm worried about leaving her alone much longer." "I absolutely can help," Marcus promised, his voice carrying the complete conviction of someone who was accustomed to making things happen through sheer determination, resources, and force of will. "And I think we should get you girls out of this dangerous heat immediately and back home to your mother. She must be worried sick about all of you." Officer Rodriguez spent several more minutes taking down basic information, running Marcus's identification through her system to confirm his background, and verifying that there were no outstanding warrants, complaints, or red flags associated with his name. The check confirmed not only his clean record but also his reputation as a respected businessman and community leader. "All right, the scene is secure and everything checks out perfectly," Officer Rodriguez announced finally, closing her notepad with satisfaction. "Mr. Thompson, if you're genuinely willing to help these children get home safely and ensure their mother receives proper medical care, I can provide a police escort to make sure everything is handled properly and according to protocol." Charlotte looked at her baby sisters, both of whom had finally quieted somewhat in the slightly cooler air that seemed to surround the group of adults, then back at Marcus with those startlingly intelligent and analytical eyes. Some kind of crucial decision was clearly forming in her 7-year-old mind, a judgment call that seemed far too sophisticated and weighty for someone her age to have to make. "Mr. Thompson," she said with formal politeness, her small voice nevertheless carrying a gravity and seriousness that made both adults pause in recognition of the moment's importance. "Do you promise on your word of honor that you're not a bad person who wants to hurt us or take us away from our mommy?" The question hit Marcus with more force than any hostile corporate takeover or difficult business negotiation had ever managed to achieve. Looking directly into those earnest, hopeful, desperately trusting eyes, he felt the full weight of a responsibility and moral obligation he had never experienced before in his adult life. "I promise you with everything I have," Marcus said with complete solemnity, meaning every single word with every fiber of his being. "I would never, ever hurt you or your sisters. All I want in the world right now is to help you get home safely to your mother and make sure she gets the medical care she needs." As they prepared to carefully transfer the children to his car, with proper safety seats that Marcus immediately insisted on purchasing from a nearby store despite the additional delay, none of them could have possibly imagined that this chance encounter on a blazing summer afternoon would completely unravel 8 years of carefully constructed secrets and reveal a truth that would fundamentally change all their lives in ways they couldn't begin to comprehend. The drive through Charlotte's neighborhood proved to be a sobering and eye-opening journey for Marcus, whose typical daily commute carried him exclusively through the city's most affluent districts, where manicured lawns, pristine sidewalks, and obvious prosperity were simply the expected norm. His Bentley moved carefully and respectfully through streets lined with modest houses, many showing the unmistakable signs of economic struggle: peeling paint that hadn't been refreshed in years, overgrown yards where lawn care was clearly a luxury beyond reach, and older cars that had obviously seen much better decades parked in driveways cracked and broken by time, weather, and deferred maintenance. The contrast with his usual environment was stark and uncomfortable, forcing Marcus to confront realities he had successfully insulated himself from for years through wealth and geographic distance. This was the America that existed parallel to his world of boardrooms and country clubs, the America where people worked multiple jobs and still struggled to pay for basic necessities, where children grew up too fast because circumstances demanded it. Charlotte sat in the passenger seat, her small frame almost swallowed by the luxurious leather interior that probably cost more than her family's monthly rent. Her feet didn't quite reach the floor, and she held herself with the careful stillness of someone unaccustomed to such opulence, but determined not to damage anything. The twins were safely secured in the back seat with the emergency car seats Marcus had purchased, their earlier distress now replaced by wide-eyed fascination with the car's many electronic features and climate control system. "Turn left at the yellow house with the broken mailbox and the fence that's falling down," Charlotte instructed, her voice still carrying that unnaturally mature tone that spoke to responsibilities no child should bear. "We live in the blue house with the white picket fence. Well, it used to be white, but most of the paint came off. As they pulled up to the address Charlotte had indicated, Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotions he hadn't expected and wasn't entirely prepared to process. The house was small, probably built sometime in the 1960s as part of a modest working-class development, with faded blue aluminum siding and a white picket fence that had indeed lost most of its paint to weather and age. The front yard was more packed dirt than actual grass, and the concrete steps leading to the front door sagged noticeably in the middle from decades of use and settling. This wasn't just modest living or simple circumstances. This was genuine poverty, the kind Marcus had worked his entire adult life to escape, and, if he was being honest with himself, to forget completely. The sight brought back visceral memories of his own childhood home in Detroit, of watching his mother count pennies to decide whether they could afford milk that week, of wearing clothes from thrift stores and pretending not to notice when other children made comments about his appearance. "Charlotte, sweetheart," Marcus said gently, turning to face her as he put the car in park and tried to process the full scope of what he was witnessing. "Exactly how long has your mother been this sick?" 3 days now," Charlotte replied, already working to unbuckle her seatbelt with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been handling adult responsibilities for far too long. At first on Monday she just had this really bad cough that kept her awake all night, but then yesterday she got really hot and couldn't stop shivering no matter how many blankets I put on her. This morning she could barely get out of bed to help me get breakfast ready for Mia and Zoe, and I've been really scared because she looks so pale and weak." Marcus came around to help with the babies, and as he lifted little Mia from her car seat, she looked up at him with those wide, curious eyes that were the most unusual and striking shade of green he had ever encountered. For a moment that stretched much longer than it should have. Marcus experienced the strangest sensation of recognition, as if he was looking into a mirror that somehow reflected back his own childhood features. The feeling was so unexpectedly strong and disorienting that it made him slightly dizzy and confused. "Let's get your mommy the medicine she needs," Marcus said, his voice rougher and more emotional than he had intended as he tried to shake off the peculiar moment of familiarity that seemed to have no logical explanation. The front door was unlocked, which immediately triggered every security instinct Marcus had developed over years of living in a world where privacy and protection were paramount concerns. But Charlotte explained matter-of-factly, with the kind of resigned acceptance that broke his heart, that they had never owned anything valuable enough to worry about theft, and besides, locks could be expensive to repair if they broke. The interior of the small house was a masterclass in making do with very little while maintaining dignity and love. The furniture was clearly second-hand, probably purchased from thrift stores or garage sales, but it was meticulously clean and carefully maintained. Children's artwork was taped to walls that desperately needed fresh paint, creating a gallery of creativity that spoke to a mother who encouraged her daughter's imagination despite their limited resources. Toys were few but organized with obvious care in a corner of the living room, and everything had been arranged to maximize the small space's functionality. Despite the obvious poverty, there were unmistakable signs of love, attention, and family warmth throughout the modest space. Family photos in mismatched frames covered one entire wall, showing the progression of the children's growth from infancy to their current ages. The photos revealed birthday parties that had clearly been crafted with creativity and love, rather than purchased with money, homemade decorations, simple cakes that were obviously baked at home, and the kind of genuine joy that money couldn't buy. "Mommy?" Charlotte called out as they entered, her voice echoing slightly in the small space and carrying a mixture of relief and anxiety. "I brought help, and I got Mia and Zoe back safe, just like I promised." A weak but clearly relieved voice responded from somewhere down the short hallway that led to what Marcus assumed were the bedrooms. "Charlotte?" "Oh, thank God, sweetheart. I was getting so worried when you didn't come back. I was starting to think about trying to get up and look for you, but I felt so dizzy." "Where have you been, honey?" "Getting your medicine, just like I said I would," Charlotte replied with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had been handling family crises for much longer than anyone should expect from a 7-year-old. "And this really nice man helped us. He's going to make sure you get better." Marcus followed Charlotte down the narrow hallway, still carrying Mia while Zoe toddled alongside them, her small hand gripping his expensive trousers with unconscious trust that simultaneously warmed and broke his heart. The hallway was lined with more family photographs, and Marcus found himself studying them as they passed, noting with growing curiosity the complete absence of any male figures in the more recent pictures, while older photos seemed to show the same women with a man who had apparently disappeared from their lives at some point. Charlotte pushed open the door to the master bedroom, which was barely large enough to accommodate the double bed and single dresser it contained, along with a small nightstand that held a glass of water, some tissues, and what appeared to be over-the-counter medications. "Mommy, this is Mr. Thompson. He's really rich and important and successful, but he's nice and he promised to help make you better." Marcus stepped across the threshold into the small bedroom and felt his entire world shift dramatically on its axis, as if reality itself had suddenly reorganized around a truth he was completely unprepared to face. Lying in the bed, pale with illness but still unmistakably beautiful even in her weakened state, was a woman whose face he had carried in his memory and his heart for 8 long, painful years. Sarah Mitchell, though she was clearly using the surname Miller now for reasons he couldn't begin to guess. The woman he had loved more deeply and completely than he had ever loved anyone before or since. The woman whose sudden, inexplicable disappearance from his life had left him heartbroken, confused, and fundamentally changed. The woman who had vanished without warning during the most crucial and demanding period of his business development, leaving him with unanswered questions that had haunted him through every subsequent relationship and every professional success. "Sarah," he breathed, the name escaping his lips like a prayer, a curse, and a revelation all rolled into one impossible moment. Sarah's eyes, already fever-bright from her illness, went impossibly wide with shock that quickly transformed into what looked unmistakably like panic mixed with disbelief. She struggled to sit up in the bed, her weakened state making even that simple movement obviously difficult and painful, her face cycling through expressions of recognition, fear, and something that might have been shame. "Marcus?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper, cracked from fever and the impossibility of the situation. "What are you? How did you? This can't be real. This has to be some kind of fever dream." Charlotte looked rapidly back and forth between the two adults, her intelligent and perceptive eyes immediately picking up on the electric tension that had suddenly filled the small bedroom like a living thing. "Mommy, do you know Mr. Thompson? You look like you've seen a ghost, and your face went even whiter than it was before." Sarah's eyes darted frantically between Marcus and Charlotte, and what little color had remained in her fever-pale cheeks drained away completely, leaving her looking almost translucent. Her lips moved as if she was desperately trying to form words, but no sound emerged except for small, panicked breathing. Marcus felt like he was drowning in a tsunami of realization, pieces of an impossibly complex puzzle suddenly clicking into place with devastating and wonderful clarity. Charlotte's familiar mannerisms that had seemed like déjà vu, the twins' distinctive and unusual eye color that matched his own so perfectly, the timeline that was beginning to make horrible, beautiful, perfect sense. When he finally managed to speak, his voice sounded completely foreign to his own ears. "Sarah," he said again, more firmly this time, though his hands were visibly shaking as he unconsciously held Mia closer to his chest. "Charlotte is." "Don't," Sarah whispered urgently, shaking her head with what little strength she possessed, her voice carrying desperate pleading. "Please, Marcus, not now, not in front of her. She doesn't know, and I can't. Not like this." But Charlotte was far too perceptive and intelligent for her own good, and the tension crackling between the two adults was impossible to ignore or misinterpret. Her young face scrunched up with concentration and growing concern as she tried to process the undercurrents of emotion swirling around her. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Charlotte asked, her voice small but insistent. "Why do you look so scared? Did Mr. Thompson do something bad to you before? Should I call Officer Rodriguez back?" Officer Rodriguez appeared in the bedroom doorway just then, having finished securing the scene and completing her initial paperwork outside. Her trained eyes immediately assessed the situation, the obviously seriously ill woman, the wealthy businessman holding a baby with surprising and natural tenderness, and the almost tangible tension that seemed to thicken the very air in the small room. "Ma'am, you clearly need immediate and professional medical attention," Officer Rodriguez said, her voice carrying both authority and genuine concern as she took in Sarah's alarming appearance. "Have you seen a doctor for this illness? This looks like more than something you should be trying to handle at home." Marcus forced himself to push aside the emotional earthquake that was completely reshaping his understanding of his own life and focus on the immediate crisis that demanded attention. Whatever incredibly complicated history he and Sarah shared, whatever secrets and misunderstandings had kept them apart for 8 years, would have to wait. Right now, she was dangerously ill, and these precious children needed their mother to survive and recover. "Officer Rodriguez, we need paramedics here immediately," Marcus said, his CEO voice cutting through Sarah's weak attempts to protest before they could even begin. "Mrs. Miller requires emergency medical intervention, and from what I can observe, her condition is more serious than she's willing to admit." "No, please," Sarah protested as strongly as her weakened state would allow, though her voice was growing noticeably weaker even as she spoke. "I can't afford the hospital bills. An ambulance ride alone would cost more than I make in 3 months, and the emergency room costs would bankrupt us. I'll be fine with just some rest and over-the-counter medication from the pharmacy." "You absolutely will not be fine," Marcus replied with firm conviction, already pulling out his phone with his free hand while still carefully holding Mia. "You're going to receive exactly the medical care you need, and you're not going to worry about the cost for even 1 second. I'll handle every expense." "Marcus, you don't understand what you're offering," Sarah said, but her voice was growing increasingly weak and strained. "You don't know what you'd be getting yourself involved in. This isn't your responsibility." Charlotte moved closer to the bed with obvious concern, her small hand instinctively finding her mother's burning forehead with the practiced care of someone who had been playing nurse for days. "Mommy, please let him help us. You're really, really sick, and I've been so scared that you might not get better." She couldn't finish the sentence, but the tears gathering in her eyes completed the thought with heartbreaking clarity. The simple, desperate words from her daughter seemed to break through Sarah's resistance entirely. Tears began flowing freely down her flushed cheeks, whether from fever, overwhelming emotion, or sheer exhaustion. Marcus couldn't determine. "Oh, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, reaching up to touch Charlotte's face with a trembling hand. "I'm so sorry I scared you so much. You shouldn't have had to take care of everyone by yourself like this. That's not your job, baby. You're supposed to be the little girl, not the grown-up." Marcus was already dialing as he spoke to Officer Rodriguez. "I'm calling my personal physician, Dr. Harrison. He's experienced with emergency house calls and has portable equipment for situations exactly like this." Into the phone, he said with the authority of someone accustomed to immediate results, "Dr. Harrison, this is Marcus Thompson. I need you to make an emergency house call immediately. I have a woman presenting with what appears to be severe pneumonia, high fever, and there are 3 small children involved who desperately need their mother to be stable and healthy." As Marcus gave the address and described Sarah's symptoms in careful detail, he found himself studying Charlotte's face with new understanding and growing amazement. Now that he knew to look for the similarities, the resemblances were not just unmistakable, but overwhelming and beautiful. She had his stubborn chin, his analytical way of processing complex information, and most remarkably, that particular expression he recognized from his own childhood photographs. The look of someone forced to grow up far too quickly, by circumstances completely beyond their control. Dr. Harrison, well accustomed to Marcus's urgent requests and generously compensated for his flexibility and discretion, arrived within 30 minutes with a comprehensive medical bag and portable equipment that effectively transformed the small bedroom into a temporary but well-equipped treatment facility. After conducting a thorough examination that confirmed Marcus's worst fears about Sarah's condition, his diagnosis was swift, professional, and deeply alarming. "This is severe pneumonia, significantly advanced beyond anything that should ever be treated at home," Dr. Harrison announced, his professional demeanor brooking absolutely no argument or discussion. "Mrs. Miller, your oxygen saturation is dangerously low, your fever indicates serious systemic infection, and your lungs show clear signs of fluid accumulation. You need immediate intravenous antibiotics, breathing treatments, and close medical monitoring." If proper treatment had been delayed even another 12 hours, This could very easily have become life-threatening. As doctor, Harrison began efficiently setting up IV equipment and preparing the various medications Sarah would need. Marcus found himself alone with Charlotte in the small living room, while Officer Rodriguez completed her final report, and the twins napped peacefully on a soft blanket that had been spread carefully on the worn carpet. "Charlotte," Marcus said with deliberate care, settling onto the second-hand couch beside her while trying to process the monumental revelations of the day, "I need to ask you something very important. When exactly is your birthday?" "December 15th, Charlotte replied without any hesitation, swinging her small legs that didn't quite reach the floor from the adult-sized couch. "I'll be 8 pretty soon. Mommy always makes me a really special cake every year, even when we don't have much money for other things, and she lets me pick what kind of decorations we use." Marcus felt his world tilting as he performed the mathematical calculation that he had been unconsciously avoiding. December 15th, nearly 8 years ago. He and Sarah had been together continuously from early spring of that year through the following February, when she had suddenly and completely inexplicably disappeared from his life, without warning, explanation, or any way to contact her. The timeline was perfect, absolutely and devastatingly perfect. "And what about your daddy?" Marcus asked, though his throat felt like it was constricting around the words, making them difficult to form and even harder to speak. Charlotte's expressive face immediately fell, and she looked down at her small hands folded carefully in her lap, with a kind of practiced sadness that suggested this was a frequent topic of painful contemplation. "Mommy says he had to go away before I was born because he had really, really important work to do that couldn't wait. She always tells me he's not a bad person, just that his job was too important for him to stay with us." She looked up at Marcus with those painfully familiar green eyes that were now impossible to ignore. "Do you think he ever wonders about us? Do you think maybe someday he might want to meet us and see how we turned out?" Marcus felt like someone had reached directly into his chest and squeezed his heart until it might burst from the pressure. Here was his daughter, his own flesh and blood, his child, asking with heartbreaking hope if her father ever thought about her, while that very same father sat just inches away, having missed 8 precious years of her life due to misunderstandings, pride, fear, and circumstances that could have been different if only they had communicated better. "I think," Marcus said very carefully, his voice thick with emotions he was struggling desperately to control, "that any father would consider himself the luckiest man who ever lived to have a daughter as brave and smart and caring and wonderful as you are." From the bedroom, they could hear Dr. Harrison explaining to Sarah in professional but gentle terms that she would need several days of intensive treatment and complete bed rest to recover fully from her illness. "The children will need consistent care and supervision while you're recovering," the doctor was saying. "Is there family who can help with their needs, or should we arrange for temporary professional childcare services?" Charlotte's small hand slipped into Marcus's much larger one with unconscious trust and affection that made his heart race with unexpected joy. "Mr. Thompson, what's going to happen to us while Mommy gets better? We don't have any grandparents or aunts or uncles nearby, and I don't know how to take care of Mia and Zoe all by myself for that many days." Marcus looked down at this incredibly brave and remarkable little girl, who was almost certainly his daughter, at the sleeping twins who carried his distinctive eyes and possibly his determined personality, and made a decision that would fundamentally change the trajectory of all their lives. "You're going to be taken care of properly," he promised, squeezing her small hand gently while meaning every word with complete conviction. "All of you. You're never going to have to handle grown-up responsibilities alone again." But first, he and Sarah were going to have the conversation that was 8 years overdue, and he suspected it would prove to be the most important and life-changing discussion of his entire existence. By the time evening shadows began lengthening across the modest neighborhood, Dr. Harrison's intensive medical treatment had worked what could only be described as a minor miracle of modern medicine. Sarah's dangerously high fever had broken completely. Her labored breathing had eased to normal rhythm, and although she remained weak and would need several more days of rest and medication, the immediate threat to her life had clearly and dramatically passed. The twins had been fed a proper dinner with fresh groceries that Marcus had quietly arranged to have delivered. And for the first time in days, they were sleeping peacefully in their shared crib without the distressing soundtrack of their mother's painful, labored breathing echoing through the small house. Charlotte sat cross-legged on the floor beside her mother's bed, relief evident in every line of her small body, now that the terrifying medical crisis appeared to be resolving successfully. She had been reading aloud from a well-worn picture book, her young voice providing comfort and reassurance both to her recovering mother and to herself after days of carrying responsibilities and fears that would have challenged many adults twice her age. Marcus had spent the remaining daylight hours handling the practical aspects of the situation, with the methodical efficiency and attention to detail that had built his business empire from nothing. He had arranged for temporary household help to assist with cleaning and childcare, ensured the house was properly stocked with nutritious food and all necessary medical supplies, established a comprehensive care plan with Dr. Harrison that included follow-up visits and emergency protocols, and quietly handled all the financial aspects of Sarah's treatment without making any show of his generosity or expecting gratitude. But now, as twilight settled gently over the neighborhood and Officer Rodriguez had long since completed her paperwork and departed with assurances that she would check on the family the following day, Marcus knew that the time for avoiding the enormous, life-changing personal conversation had finally arrived. The weight of 8 years of misunderstandings, missed opportunities, lost time, and life-altering secrets hung in the air between him and Sarah like a physical presence that could no longer be ignored. "Charlotte, sweetheart," Sarah said softly to her daughter, her voice still weak but notably stronger than it had been just hours earlier. "Would you mind checking on Mia and Zoe one more time to make sure they're sleeping comfortably, and maybe organizing those new books that Mr. Thompson brought for you? He and I need to discuss some very important grown-up matters that might be confusing for little ears." Charlotte looked between the two adults with the intuitive wisdom that some children develop when circumstances force them to mature far beyond their chronological years. The tension between them was obvious and almost tangible, but it felt different now than it had earlier. Less like fear or anger and more like the kind of serious, weighty conversation that happened when important, life-changing decisions needed to be made by responsible adults. "Is this conversation about my daddy?" Charlotte asked quietly, her perceptive question hitting the emotional target with devastating accuracy and directness that took both adults completely by surprise. Sarah's breath caught audibly in her throat, and Marcus felt that familiar tightening in his chest that seemed to occur every time Charlotte mentioned her absent father. Only now the sensation was magnified exponentially by his growing certainty about the truth of their relationship. "It's about some very complicated things that happened before you were born," Sarah replied carefully, choosing each word with obvious deliberation and concern. "But Charlotte, no matter what we discuss tonight, no matter what we decide or what changes might happen, I want you to understand completely that you and your sisters are the most precious, important, and beloved things in my entire world, and that will never, ever change." After Charlotte reluctantly left the room, closing the door behind her with the careful consideration of a child who understood the gravity and importance of adult conversations, Sarah and Marcus sat in heavy, emotionally charged silence for several long minutes. The small bedroom felt even smaller and more intimate with the weight of unspoken truths, years of separation, and the life-changing revelations that hung between them like storm clouds ready to break. Finally, Sarah spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of years of regret and carefully guarded secrets. "I know what you're thinking, Marcus. I can see it written all over your face, the way you've been looking at Charlotte, the way you held Mia like she belonged in your arms. You've figured it out, haven't you?" "Have I?" Marcus replied, his own voice strained with the enormous effort of controlling emotions that threatened to completely overwhelm him. "Because what I think I've figured out is that I've missed 8 precious years of my daughter's life. I think I've realized that you disappeared from my life without any explanation and allowed me to believe that our relationship, our love, our future together simply wasn't important enough to you to work through whatever problems we were having. I think I've discovered that while I was single-mindedly building a business empire and accumulating wealth, my own children were living in poverty just 20 minutes from my downtown office, struggling to survive while I had no idea they even existed." Sarah closed her eyes tightly, fresh tears leaking from the corners despite her obvious exhaustion and the emotional toll of the day's revelations. It's not that simple, Marcus. It was never that simple. And it wasn't a decision I made lightly or without agonizing about it every single day for 8 years. Then help me understand, Marcus said, leaning forward in the small chair beside her bed, his voice carrying both desperation and determination. Explain to me how you could make the decision to keep this monumental secret from me. Help me comprehend how you thought I wouldn't want to know about the existence of my own children, how you convinced yourself that I would be better off never knowing I was a father. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, gathering not just her physical strength but the emotional courage necessary to revisit and explain decisions she had questioned, regretted, and justified to herself countless times over the years. When she finally began to speak, her voice carried the weight of years of pain, regret, and desperate rationalization. When I first discovered I was pregnant with Charlotte, it was in February, and we had just finished having that terrible relationship-defining fight about your work schedule and your priorities, she began, her words careful and measured as she tried to accurately recreate the emotional landscape of 8 years ago. You were working 18-hour days consistently, traveling constantly for business development meetings, and when I tried to talk seriously about our future together, about maybe finding some balance so we could build a real life as a couple, you said very clearly that your company had to come first for at least the next 5 to 7 years, if you wanted to achieve the level of success you were aiming for. Marcus remembered that argument with painful, vivid clarity, the mounting pressure from investors who were questioning his commitment, the impossible demands of trying to establish his business in an incredibly competitive market, the crushing weight of expectations and financial obligations that had made every personal relationship feel like a luxury he couldn't afford. But Sarah, discovering that you were pregnant, learning that we were going to have a baby together, that would have changed every single calculation, every priority, every decision I was making. My own child would have instantly become more important than any business deal or financial goal. Would it have, though? Sarah asked, looking directly at him for the first time since his arrival, her eyes searching his face for complete honesty. Because just 3 days after I found out I was pregnant, when I was nervous but excited about sharing the news with you, I came to your office specifically to tell you about the baby. I had rehearsed what I was going to say, I had imagined how we would figure out our future together, and I was genuinely hopeful about how you would react. Marcus felt a cold sense of dread beginning to form in his stomach as he realized where this story was heading. Sarah, what happened at my office? Your secretary told me you were in a crucial conference call that couldn't be interrupted, so I sat in the waiting area for almost an hour, just trying to work up the courage to share the most important news of my life, she continued, her voice gaining strength from finally being able to tell this story that had shaped and haunted both their lives. The office walls weren't very thick, and I could hear you quite clearly. You were speaking to someone about your commitment level and your focus on the business, and you said very explicitly that you couldn't afford any distractions or complications right now. You said that personal relationships and emotional commitments would have to wait until you had completely secured your position in the market. The memory hit Marcus like a devastating physical blow as the conference call came flooding back to him with perfect, horrible clarity. He had been speaking to a particularly demanding potential investor who had been questioning whether Marcus was serious enough and focused enough to merit a significant financial investment. Someone who had specifically expressed concerns about young entrepreneurs getting distracted by personal relationships at crucial developmental stages. You thought I was talking about you, Marcus realized with growing horror, understanding exactly how his words would have sounded to someone who didn't have the full context. About us, about our relationship. I thought you were talking about our entire future together, Sarah corrected, her tears flowing more freely now as she relived the devastating moment. I thought you were telling an investor or business partner that I was a distraction, that our relationship was something that needed to be postponed or eliminated, so you could focus on what really mattered to you. But that's not what I meant at all, Marcus said urgently. I was reassuring a potential investor who was concerned about my focus level. I was talking about avoiding casual dating or superficial relationships, not about you, never about you. But I didn't know that, Sarah replied, her voice breaking with remembered pain and confusion. And then, as I was leaving the building feeling completely heartbroken and confused, I overheard two of your business associates talking while waiting for the elevator. They were actually joking about how Thompson is way too smart and ambitious to get trapped or tied down by some woman when he's this close to making his fortune. They were laughing about how you had learned to keep your priorities straight. Marcus felt physically sick as the complete scope and devastation of the misunderstanding became crystal clear. Every single word Sarah had overheard could be interpreted exactly as she had understood it, even though the reality had been completely, tragically different. Those business associates had been making crude, ignorant comments based on their own limited understanding of his situation, not reflecting his actual feelings or intentions. So you decided to leave without ever giving me the chance to explain or clarify what you had heard, Marcus said, though he was beginning to understand the emotional logic that had driven her decision, even if he couldn't agree with it. I was 24 years old, Marcus, Sarah said, her voice heavy with the weight of remembered fear and overwhelming circumstances. I was pregnant, terrified, completely convinced that I was nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle to your success and happiness. I thought I was being noble and self-sacrificing, saving you from a responsibility that might derail your dreams and ambitions, and protecting my baby from having a father who might grow to resent her for complicating his carefully planned life. Our baby, Marcus corrected with firm conviction, his voice rough with emotion. Charlotte was our baby, and the decision about how to handle the pregnancy should have been ours to make together, as partners and as people who loved each other. Sarah nodded slowly, acknowledging the fundamental truth of his words while still trying to help him understand the mindset that had driven her choices. And when I was 6 months pregnant and found out I was actually carrying twins as well, the situation became even more overwhelming and impossible. 3 babies, Marcus. I was working 2 part-time jobs as a waitress, living in a tiny studio apartment that barely had room for me, let alone 3 children, and I was absolutely terrified of the magnitude of what I had committed myself to handle alone. Marcus ran both hands through his hair in frustration and disbelief, trying to process the full magnitude of what had been lost to misunderstanding, poor communication, and tragic timing. Why didn't you contact me when they were born? Why didn't you reach out when you were struggling financially, when you needed help, when Charlotte started asking questions about her father? Did you really believe that I would turn my back on my own children if I knew they existed? By that time, Thompson Industries was already taking off dramatically, Sarah admitted, shame and regret coloring her voice. You were being featured in business magazines, giving interviews about innovative technology applications, being recognized as one of the most promising young entrepreneurs in the region. Meanwhile, I was barely making ends meet, buying diapers with coupon savings and discount store specials, choosing between paying for heat or groceries some months. She paused, struggling with the emotional weight of her memories. I felt completely ashamed of where I had ended up compared to where you were heading. You had become this powerful, accomplished, successful man who was changing entire industries. And I was just a struggling single mother who could barely afford to keep the lights on. I convinced myself that your life was better without the complications and responsibilities that we represented. That wasn't your decision to make unilaterally, Marcus said, though his anger was increasingly tempered by his growing understanding of how isolated, overwhelmed, and impossible her situation must have felt. I know that now, Sarah whispered, her voice filled with years of accumulated regret. Especially these last few years watching Charlotte ask increasingly sophisticated questions about her father, seeing how incredibly hard she tries to take care of all of us because she feels responsible for our welfare. She's so much like you, Marcus, brilliant and determined and completely devoted to protecting and providing for the people she loves. Sometimes it breaks my heart to watch her carrying burdens and responsibilities that should never belong to a 7-year-old child. Marcus thought about Charlotte's remarkable maturity and competence, her protective instincts with her younger sisters, her brave decision to call 911 when she felt threatened, her willingness to walk dangerous distances in extreme heat to get medicine for her mother. All traits and characteristics he recognized from his own childhood, his own drive to take care of his family when circumstances demanded more than should be expected from someone so young. She called me Mr. Thompson, Marcus said quietly, the reality of the situation hitting him with fresh emotional force. My own daughter treated me like a kind stranger and thanked me politely for helping people she had no idea were her own family members. She doesn't know anything specific about you, Marcus, Sarah said urgently, wanting to be completely clear about Charlotte's understanding of the situation. I never told any of them your name or any identifying details. I just said their father was a good, honorable man who had very important work to do that required him to be somewhere else. Why did you choose to frame it that way instead of telling them I had abandoned them or didn't want them? Sarah was quiet for several moments, choosing her words with careful consideration. Because despite everything, despite all my hurt and confusion and anger, I never stopped believing that you were fundamentally a good person. And I didn't want my children to spend their childhood wondering why they weren't lovable enough or important enough for their father to choose them over his career. I didn't want them to feel like they were in competition with work for their father's attention and affection. The irony was both devastating and beautiful in its completeness. Marcus had spent 8 years building a business empire, driven partly by the heartbreak of losing Sarah and the need to prove himself worthy of success, believing he was creating something meaningful and lasting that would justify all his sacrifices. Meanwhile, his own children had grown up believing their father had chosen work over family, the exact opposite of what would have been true if he had known about their existence and had the opportunity to make informed choices about his priorities. Sarah, Marcus said finally, his voice carrying the absolute conviction of complete certainty. I need you to understand something that is more true than anything else I have ever said in my entire life. If I had known about Charlotte, about Mia and Zoe, if I had known that you were pregnant and needed support, nothing else in the world would have mattered more than being their father and taking care of all of you. No business deal, no amount of money, no level of professional success or recognition would have been more important than being part of their daily lives and watching them grow up. Sarah studied his face intently, searching for any hint of doubt, reservation, or polite exaggeration, and seemed to find only complete sincerity and unwavering conviction. I believe you, she said softly, and for the first time her voice carried hope instead of fear. Looking at how you've handled everything today, seeing how naturally and lovingly you interact with them, witnessing your immediate willingness to take responsibility for their welfare, I do believe you completely. And Marcus, I need you to know how deeply, profoundly sorry I am for keeping them from you. I was young and scared and proud, and I made decisions based on fear and assumptions instead of faith and communication. Marcus moved his chair closer to the bed, taking her hand gently in both of his while being careful not to disturb the IV line Dr. Harrison had placed. We can't change or undo the past 8 years, Sarah. We can't get back the time we lost or the experiences we missed, but we can absolutely change what happens from this moment forward, starting right now. What exactly are you saying? She asked, though hope was beginning to replace the fear and uncertainty in her eyes. I'm saying that I want to be their father in every way that matters and in every way that's possible, Marcus replied with complete determination. I want to be part of their daily lives, their important moments and their ordinary ones. I want to help Charlotte with homework and teach the twins to ride bicycles and be there for bedtime stories and morning pancakes and everything else I've already missed. He paused, studying her face carefully. And Sarah, if you'll allow me, if you're willing to trust me and give us another chance, I want to be part of your life again, too. I never stopped loving you. I spent 8 years trying to convince myself that you were gone forever, trying to move on and build a life without you. But seeing you today, being reminded of who we were together and who we could be again, I never got over you. Sarah's eyes filled with tears that looked completely different from any she had shed earlier in the day. These seemed like tears of possibility, hope, and cautious joy rather than pain and regret. The twins, Marcus, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. You need to understand and accept that Mia and Zoe are your daughters too. All 3 of them are yours, completely and forever. Marcus felt his understanding of his own identity and purpose expand in the most wonderful and overwhelming way imaginable. 3 daughters, he said with wonder and pure joy evident in his voice. I have 3 beautiful, amazing daughters. From the living room, they could hear Charlotte's sweet voice softly singing a gentle lullaby to her sisters. her young voice filled with the kind of pure, protective love that had somehow held this small, struggling family together through years of hardship, uncertainty, and hope deferred but never abandoned. "Tomorrow," Marcus said, squeezing Sarah's hand with gentle but firm conviction, "we start building the life and the family we should have had all along. All of us, together, as it was always meant to be." But as the evening settled peacefully around them and the house grew quiet with the secure, restful sleep of children who finally felt completely safe and loved, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that while they had solved the mystery of the past and opened the door to a beautiful future, the real challenge would be learning how to trust in the possibility of lasting happiness when none of them had ever experienced it before. 3 weeks had passed since that life-changing afternoon on Maple Street, and the small blue house had been transformed in ways both visible and invisible. Sarah's recovery had been remarkably swift under Dr. Harrison's continued care, and she was now strong enough to be up and around for most of the day, though she still tired easily and needed frequent rest periods. The most obvious changes were physical: a new roof that no longer leaked during rainstorms, fresh paint on the exterior walls, a repaired fence that now stood straight and proud, and a yard that had been professionally landscaped with child-friendly grass and a small playground set. Inside, the house had been subtly upgraded with better furniture, a new refrigerator that actually kept food cold, and central air conditioning that made the summer heat bearable. But the most significant changes were happening in the relationships being carefully rebuilt between 4 people who were learning to be a family. Marcus had been spending every evening at the house after work, and entire weekends, gradually integrating himself into the daily rhythms of life with 3 young children. The process was more complex than any business merger he had ever negotiated. "Daddy Marcus, watch this," Charlotte called out from the new swing set, her voice filled with the kind of pure joy that had been missing from her life for too long. She had taken to calling him Daddy Marcus as a compromise, acknowledging their relationship while still maintaining some emotional distance as she adjusted to having a father figure in her life. Marcus looked up from where he was sitting on the back steps, helping 3-year-old Zoe color in a new coloring book. "I'm watching, sweetheart. Show me what you can do." Charlotte pumped her legs harder, swinging higher than the safety-conscious part of Marcus was entirely comfortable with, but he was learning to let her test her own limits. "Look how high I can go. I bet I could swing right over the top if I tried hard enough." "Let's maybe not test that theory just yet," Marcus called back, trying to strike the balance between supportive and protective that he was still learning to navigate. 3 weeks of fatherhood had taught him that parenting involved a constant tension between wanting to shield his children from all possible harm and recognizing that they needed room to grow and explore. Sarah appeared in the back doorway, carrying a tray with lemonade and sandwiches, moving with the careful pace of someone still regaining their full strength. "Lunchtime, everyone. Charlotte, come down from there before you give your father a heart attack." The word father still sent a small thrill through Marcus every time Sarah said it naturally, without the careful consideration that had marked their conversations in the early days of this new arrangement. They were all learning to be comfortable with the reality of their situation, but some moments still felt fragile, as if the wrong word or gesture might shatter the carefully constructed piece they were building. "Mia's napping?" Marcus asked as Sarah settled beside him on the steps, noting that only 3-year-old Zoe was with them in the backyard. "Finally went down about 20 minutes ago," Sarah replied, accepting the glass of lemonade he offered her. "She's been fighting her afternoon nap all week. I think she's afraid she'll miss something important if she sleeps." Marcus smiled at the description, recognizing his own tendency to resist rest when interesting things were happening. "She definitely has the Thompson drive to be involved in everything. Yesterday, she insisted on helping me review quarterly reports because she saw Charlotte doing homework and wanted to do important work too." "Speaking of important work," Sarah said, her tone becoming more serious, "we need to talk about some practical matters. Legal things that we've been avoiding but can't put off much longer." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Over the past 3 weeks, they had been operating in a kind of bubble, focusing on the immediate needs of family integration and avoiding the more complex legal and social implications of their situation. But Sarah was right. There were official matters that needed to be addressed. The birth certificates, Marcus said, understanding immediately. Among other things, Sarah nodded. Charlotte and the twins have no legal father listed. If we're going to make this official, if you want full parental rights and responsibilities, there are steps we need to take. Charlotte had finished swinging and was now sitting cross-legged in the grass, making a daisy chain with the focused concentration she brought to all her projects. Zoe had abandoned her coloring book and was attempting to catch butterflies that kept eluding her small hands. I want that, Marcus said without hesitation. I want to be their legal father in every way possible. But Sarah, what does that mean for us, for our relationship? This was the question they had been dancing around for weeks. Marcus was spending most of his non-working hours at the house, had essentially moved his life around the needs of his newly discovered family, but his official status remained ambiguous. He was sleeping in his downtown penthouse apartment, while his heart and attention were entirely focused 20 minutes away in a modest neighborhood where his real life was happening. I don't know, Sarah admitted honestly. This situation doesn't exactly come with a handbook. We're not married. We broke up 8 years ago under complicated circumstances, and now we're trying to co-parent 3 children while figuring out if we can rebuild what we used to have. Do you want to rebuild it? Marcus asked quietly, the question carrying the weight of all their shared history and uncertain future. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching their daughters play in the yard that Marcus had transformed from dirt and weeds into a safe, beautiful space for children to grow. I never stopped loving you either, Marcus. But love wasn't our problem 8 years ago. Communication was. Trust was. Making assumptions about what the other person wanted instead of asking directly. So we learned to communicate better, Marcus said. We ask direct questions and give honest answers. It's more complicated than that when children are involved, Sarah replied, her voice gentle but realistic. Charlotte is just starting to trust you, to believe that you're going to stay. The twins are bonding with you beautifully, but they're also at an age where consistency and stability are crucial. If we try to be a couple again, and it doesn't work. Marcus understood her concern completely. You're worried that if our romantic relationship fails, I'll leave them too. I'm worried about a lot of things, Sarah admitted. I'm worried that you'll get tired of the constant noise and chaos that comes with 3 small children. I'm worried that your business will demand more of your time and attention than we can spare. I'm worried that the reality of daily family life will be different from what you're imagining. These were fair concerns, Marcus realized, especially given their history. What can I do to prove that those things won't happen? Time, Sarah said simply. Consistency. Being here not just for the fun parts but for the difficult moments too. Sick children at 3 in the morning, tantrums in grocery stores, school conferences, and doctor visits, and all the mundane, exhausting parts of parenting that don't feel magical or meaningful in the moment. As if summoned by their conversation, Mia appeared in the back doorway, her hair tousled from sleep and her small face crumpled with the cranky expression of a child who had woken up disoriented. Mama, I had a scary dream, she announced, her voice still thick with sleep. Sarah started to get up, but Marcus was already moving. I'll get her, he said, scooping Mia into his arms with the practiced ease he had developed over the past 3 weeks. What was scary in your dream, sweetheart? There was a big monster, and he made you go away, Mia said, wrapping her small arms around his neck with the complete trust that still amazed Marcus every time he experienced it. And Mama was sad, and Charlotte was crying. Marcus felt his heart break a little at the unconscious fears his 3-year-old daughter was processing through her dreams. Well, there are no monsters here, he said gently, settling back onto the steps with Mia in his lap. And I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Mia asked, looking at him with those serious green eyes that were so much like his own. I promise, Marcus said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. Daddy Marcus is going to be right here, taking care of you and your sisters and your mama. Charlotte looked up from her daisy chain, having overheard the conversation. Daddy Marcus, what if your work needs you to go far away? Mama's friend Jessica's daddy had to move to another state for his job, and now she only sees him sometimes. The question hit Marcus harder than he had expected. Charlotte's concern was based on real-world experience. She had seen how easily fathers could disappear from children's lives, and she was protecting herself by expecting it to happen eventually. Charlotte, Come here for a minute, Marcus said gently. When she had settled beside him on the steps, he looked seriously at both her and Sarah. I want to tell you something important about my work and my priorities. When I was younger, before I knew about you girls, work was the most important thing in my life. I thought success meant building the biggest company and making the most money possible. Charlotte listened with the intense focus she gave to important conversations, while Zoe had wandered over to lean against Sarah's legs, and Mia remained curled in Marcus's arms. But now I understand that success really means having people you love and who love you back. My work is important and I'm good at it, but you girls and your mama are the most important things in my world. So I've been making changes. What kind of changes? Charlotte asked, her analytical mind wanting specifics rather than vague assurances. Marcus smiled at her directness, recognizing his own need for concrete information. I've hired more people to handle the parts of the business that used to require me to travel. I've moved my office hours so I can be here every evening for dinner and bedtime stories. And I've told everyone who works with me that my family time is not negotiable. What does that mean? Charlotte persisted. It means that unless there's a genuine emergency, like someone being hurt or the building being on fire, I don't take work calls or attend meetings during the hours when I should be with you, Marcus explained. It means I've chosen to make less money so I can have more time with the people I love. Sarah looked surprised at this revelation. Marcus, you didn't tell me you'd restructured your work schedule. I wanted to prove it with actions rather than just promises, Marcus replied. Over the past 3 weeks, I've turned down 2 international business trips, delegated 3 major client presentations, and hired an additional project manager so I don't have to work evenings anymore. Charlotte seemed to be processing this information carefully. So if I had a school play or something, you would come even if work wanted you to do something else? I would be in the front row, Marcus promised, with a camera and probably embarrassing you by cheering too loudly. For the first time since he had known her, Charlotte truly smiled at him without reservation, not the polite, careful smile she had been giving him, but a real expression of joy and trust. That sounds pretty good, she said, and Marcus felt like he had just won the most important negotiation of his entire life. 2 months later, the October morning air carried the crisp promise of autumn as Marcus sat in his car outside Charlotte's elementary school, waiting for the parent-teacher conference that represented another milestone in his journey toward becoming a real father. He had attended dozens of high-stakes business meetings, negotiated million-dollar deals, and presented to hostile boards of directors. But somehow the prospect of discussing his 8-year-old daughter's academic progress made him more nervous than any corporate challenge ever had. Sarah emerged from the school building, her face unreadable as she walked toward his car. They had decided to attend the conference together, presenting a united front as Charlotte's parents despite the complexity of their personal relationship, which remained carefully undefined but steadily growing stronger. How did it go? Marcus asked as Sarah settled into the passenger seat. Complicated, Sarah replied, though she didn't seem upset. Mrs. Peterson wants to discuss some things with both of us. She says Charlotte is exceptional. Marcus felt a familiar surge of pride mixed with concern. Over the past 2 months, he had observed Charlotte's remarkable intelligence and maturity, but he had also seen signs that she might be struggling with social integration and age-appropriate behavior. Exceptional how? He asked as they walked back toward the school building. Let's wait and hear what she has to say, Sarah suggested, though Marcus could see both worry and excitement in her expression. Mrs. Peterson, Charlotte's 3rd-grade teacher, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the sort of calm demeanor that suggested decades of experience with children and their complex needs. Her classroom was bright and welcoming, with student artwork covering the walls and learning stations arranged to encourage both individual and group activities. Thank you both for coming, Mrs. Peterson said, gesturing for them to sit at the small table she had set up near her desk. I wanted to meet with you because Charlotte is one of the most remarkable students I've encountered in my 27 years of teaching. Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances, unsure whether this was leading toward praise or concern. Charlotte's academic abilities are extraordinary, Mrs. Peterson continued, opening a folder filled with examples of Charlotte's work. She's reading at a high school level. Her mathematical reasoning skills are off the charts, and her written expression is sophisticated beyond anything I would expect from a third grader. She showed them essays Charlotte had written, math problems she had solved using methods that wouldn't typically be taught until middle school, and book reports on novels that were far above her grade level. "This is wonderful," Sarah said, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. "But I'm sensing there's a however coming." "However," Mrs. Peterson confirmed with a slight smile, "Charlotte's social and emotional development is more complex. She has difficulty relating to her peers because her intellectual interests are so advanced, but she also carries a level of responsibility and seriousness that's unusual for her age." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "You're saying she doesn't fit in with other 8-year-olds?" "I'm saying she often acts more like a young adult than a child," Mrs. Peterson replied gently. "She organizes other students, takes charge of group projects, and frequently tries to help her classmates with problems that she perceives as simple, but that are actually quite challenging for children their age." Sarah leaned forward, her concern evident. "Is she being bossy? Are the other children not liking her?" "It's not that simple, Mrs. Peterson explained. "The other children actually look up to Charlotte quite a bit. She's kind and helpful, and she has natural leadership qualities. But she also seems to feel responsible for everyone around her in a way that suggests she's been carrying adult responsibilities for some time." Marcus and Sarah both knew exactly what Mrs. Peterson was observing. Charlotte had been the family caretaker, the one who made sure her baby sisters were fed and safe, who called for help when her mother was sick, who navigated adult situations with remarkable competence because circumstances had demanded it. "What do you recommend?" Marcus asked, his business mind immediately jumping to solutions and action plans. "I think Charlotte would benefit significantly from academic acceleration," Mrs. Peterson said. "She needs intellectual challenges that match her abilities. But I also think she needs permission to be a child, to play and be silly, and not feel responsible for managing everyone else's well-being." "Academic acceleration means what, exactly?" Sarah asked. "There are several options we could explore. Charlotte could skip a grade level, though that can sometimes create social challenges. She could participate in gifted and talented programs that allow her to work on advanced projects while remaining with her age group peers. Or she could attend a specialized school designed for intellectually gifted children." Marcus felt his protective instincts activate immediately. Would changing schools be traumatic for her? "She's just beginning to settle in here. It depends entirely on Charlotte and what she wants," Mrs. Peterson replied. "Some gifted children thrive in specialized environments where they're surrounded by intellectual peers. Others do better in mainstream settings where they learn to navigate different types of people and situations." "What does Charlotte say when you talk to her about this?" Sarah asked. Mrs. Peterson smiled at the question. "Charlotte says she likes learning new things, but she's worried about leaving her sisters. She's also concerned about making friends who won't think she's weird for reading books about science and history instead of age-appropriate fiction." The description broke Marcus's heart a little. His brilliant daughter was worried about being too smart, about standing out in ways that might make her less lovable or acceptable to her peers. "Can we think about this decision?" Sarah asked. "Maybe discuss it with Charlotte and see what she's comfortable with?" "Of course," Mrs. Peterson agreed. "But I would encourage you to make a decision relatively soon. Charlotte is clearly bored with the current curriculum, and bored-gifted children sometimes develop behavioral issues or lose their enthusiasm for learning entirely." As they left the school and walked back to Marcus's car, both parents were quiet, processing the implications of what they had learned. "I did this to her," Sarah said finally, her voice heavy with guilt. "I made her grow up too fast because I needed her to be responsible for things no 8-year-old should handle." "We both did this to her," Marcus replied firmly. "My absence meant you were overwhelmed and needed her help. My not knowing about them created the circumstances that forced Charlotte to become more mature than she should have been." "So what do we do now?" Sarah asked. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "We give her everything she needs to thrive. The best education, the best opportunities, and most importantly, the chance to be both brilliant and 8 years old. That might mean private school, specialized programs, things that cost a lot of money," Sarah warned. though her tone suggested she was testing his commitment rather than expressing genuine concern about finances. "Sarah, I would spend every dollar I have if it meant giving Charlotte, giving all our daughters the best possible future," Marcus said with complete conviction. "Money is just a tool. The question isn't whether we can afford to give them what they need. It's whether we're brave enough to make the changes necessary to be the parents they deserve." Changes like what? Marcus took a deep breath, preparing to voice the decision that had been forming in his mind over the past several weeks. Changes like me selling my downtown penthouse and moving to be closer to you and the girls. Changes like us figuring out what our relationship is going to be, officially and legally. Changes like making sure Charlotte knows she can be as smart as she wants without worrying that it will make her different or unwanted. Sarah stared at him, surprise and something that looked like hope flickering in her eyes. "You want to move closer?" "I want to move in," Marcus said, the words carrying more weight than he had intended. "I want to wake up in the same house as my daughters every morning. I want to be there for middle-of-the-night nightmares and early morning pancakes and everything in between." "Marcus," Sarah began, but he continued before she could voice whatever concerns were forming. "I know we agreed to take things slowly, to focus on the children and not complicate things with our relationship. But Sarah, these past 2 months have shown me something important. We're not just co-parenting. We're rebuilding something that was always meant to be. Charlotte needs to see that her parents love each other, that families can be stable and permanent." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. "Are you saying you want us to get married?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with 8 years of history, 2 months of careful reconstruction, and the future of 3 little girls who deserved all the love and stability their parents could provide. "I'm saying I want us to be a real family in every way that matters," Marcus replied. "Legal, emotional, practical. I want Charlotte to never again worry that I might leave. I want Mia and Zoe to grow up knowing their parents are committed to each other and to them. And yes, Sarah, I want to marry you. Not because it's practical or convenient, but because I love you and I want the world to know that we belong together." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from Charlotte, who was staying with a neighbor after school. The message was brief but urgent. "Daddy Marcus, Mia fell off the monkey bars at daycare. They want you and Mama to come right now." "We have to go," Sarah said immediately, all other concerns instantly secondary to their child's well-being. As they rushed toward Marcus's car, he realized that this was exactly what he had been trying to explain to Sarah. This was real life. Unexpected emergencies, shared responsibilities, the immediate instinct to protect their children together. This was what family meant, and he was ready for all of it, ready for. The emergency room at Children's Hospital was bustling with the controlled chaos typical of a busy afternoon, but Marcus barely noticed the activity around him as he sat holding 3-year-old Mia, who had finally stopped crying and was now drowsing against his chest. Her left arm was in a bright purple cast that extended from her wrist to just below her elbow. The result of what doctors had confirmed was a clean break from her fall off the daycare monkey bars. Sarah sat beside them, gently stroking Mia's hair while keeping a watchful eye on Zoe, who was playing quietly with a puzzle in the child-friendly corner of the waiting area. Charlotte stood near the large windows, her small face pressed against the glass as she watched ambulances arrive and depart, her expression thoughtful and slightly worried. "The doctor said she'll heal completely within 6 weeks," Marcus murmured to Sarah, speaking softly to avoid waking Mia. "No lasting damage, no complications expected." "I know," Sarah replied, though the tension hadn't entirely left her voice. "It's just hard seeing her hurt. She's never broken a bone before." Marcus shifted carefully, adjusting Mia's position without disturbing her rest. The daycare supervisor said she was trying to keep up with the bigger kids on equipment that was probably too advanced for her age group. Apparently she's been doing that a lot lately. "Trying to keep up," Sarah repeated, understanding the implication immediately. Like her big sister always had to do. It was true, and they both recognized it. Mia and Zoe had been unconsciously modeling Charlotte's premature maturity, attempting activities and behaviors that were beyond their developmental stage because they were trying to match their sister's remarkable capabilities. Charlotte turned from the window and walked over to them, her expression serious. Is Mia going to be okay for our family meeting tonight? She asked, with the careful consideration she brought to all important matters. Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances. They had planned to discuss Mrs. Peterson's recommendations about Charlotte's education, along with the broader questions about their family structure that had been raised during their conversation outside the school. What kind of family meeting? Zoe asked, looking up from her puzzle with immediate interest. The kind where we talk about important things that affect all of us, Charlotte replied, settling cross-legged on the floor beside her twin sister. Like school and where we're going to live, and whether Daddy Marcus is going to be our real daddy officially. Marcus felt his heart skip at the casual way Charlotte had referred to him as their real daddy, as if the legal and emotional distinctions had already been resolved in her mind. Charlotte, Sarah said gently, how much have you been thinking about these things? A lot, Charlotte admitted with the honesty that Marcus had come to expect from her. I hear you and Daddy Marcus talking sometimes when you think I'm not listening. And I've been wondering about things like whether we're going to stay in our house or move somewhere bigger, and whether you and Daddy Marcus love each other the way parents usually do. The directness of the question caught both adults off guard, though they probably should have expected it from their perceptive daughter. What do you think about those possibilities? Marcus asked carefully, genuinely curious about Charlotte's perspective on the changes that might be coming to their family. Charlotte was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts with characteristic precision. I think it would be good if you lived with us all the time instead of just visiting. I think Mia and Zoe would like having you there when they wake up scared at night, and I think Mama's happier when you're around, even though she tries to hide it sometimes. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks at her daughter's astute observation. You think I'm happier? You smile more, Charlotte said simply. And you don't get that worried look when you're trying to figure out how to pay for things or fix things that are broken. Plus, you laugh at Daddy Marcus's jokes even when they're not very funny. Marcus made a sound of mock offense. Hey, my jokes are hilarious. They're dad jokes, Charlotte replied with the sort of gentle tolerance that suggested she actually enjoyed his humor. They're supposed to be kind of corny. Mia stirred in Marcus's arms, blinking sleepily as consciousness returned. Daddy, she said softly, the single word carrying complete trust and affection. My arm feels better now. That's because the medicine is helping, Marcus explained, kissing the top of her head, and because you're being very brave. Are we going home now? Mia asked, looking around the hospital waiting room with the disorientation of someone who had fallen asleep in one situation and awakened in another. Soon, Sarah promised. The doctors just want to make sure you understand how to take care of your cast. As if summoned by her words, Dr. Kim appeared with discharge papers and final instructions. After reviewing the care requirements for Mia's cast and scheduling a follow-up appointment, the family was finally able to leave the hospital as the evening sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. During the drive home, Marcus found himself thinking about the conversation with Charlotte, about her mature analysis of their family dynamics, and about the decision that had been crystallizing in his mind throughout the day's events. By the time they pulled into the driveway of the small blue house, he knew what needed to happen next. Actually, Marcus said as they prepared to go inside, I think we should have that family meeting tonight after all. There are some things I want to discuss with all of you. Once Mia was settled comfortably on the couch with her cast propped on pillows and Zoe was curled beside her sister, Marcus and Sarah sat facing their daughters in what had become their informal family conference arrangement. First, Marcus began, I want to talk about school choices for Charlotte. Mrs. Peterson thinks you might be happier and more challenged in a different kind of educational program. Charlotte listened intently as Marcus explained the various options, advanced programs, specialized schools, acceleration, and the benefits and challenges of each approach. What do you want to do? Sarah asked when Marcus had finished outlining the possibilities. Charlotte considered the question seriously. I want to learn more interesting things, she said finally, but I don't want to be so far away that I can't help take care of Mia and Zoe if they need me. Charlotte, Marcus said gently, it's wonderful that you love your sisters and want to help them, but taking care of them is Mama's job and my job, not yours. Your job is to be 8 years old and learn and play and discover what you're passionate about. But what if something happens and you need me to help? Charlotte asked, the worry evident in her young voice. Then we'll figure it out together, Sarah assured her. But sweetheart, you don't have to be responsible for everyone else's well-being. You get to just be a kid. Charlotte looked skeptical, as if the concept of not being responsible for others was foreign to her experience. Which brings me to the second thing I want to discuss, Marcus continued. I've made some decisions about our family that I hope you'll all be happy about. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, setting it on the coffee table where all four of them could see it clearly. Sarah's breath caught audibly, while Charlotte's eyes went wide with understanding. Sarah Miller, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. 8 years ago, we let fear and misunderstanding separate us. I don't want to waste another day wondering what our life could have been like if we had been braver and more honest with each other. He opened the box, revealing a ring that was elegant but not ostentatious, clearly expensive but chosen for beauty rather than display. I love you, and I love our daughters, and I want us to be a real family in every possible way. Will you marry me? Charlotte looked between her parents with barely contained excitement, while the twins watched with the fascination of children observing adult rituals they didn't quite understand but recognized as important. Sarah stared at the ring, then at Marcus's face, tears gathering in her eyes. Are you sure this is what you want? Marriage and family life and everything that comes with 3 young children? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Marcus replied. I want school plays and soccer games and family vacations. I want to argue about bedtime routines and worry about teenage dating and help with homework every night. I want all of it, Sarah, the beautiful parts and the exhausting parts and everything in between. Say yes, Mama, Charlotte urged, unable to contain her enthusiasm any longer. Say yes so we can be a real family. Sarah looked at her daughters, at Charlotte's hopeful face, at the twins who were clapping their hands in excitement, despite not fully understanding what was happening, and then back at Marcus. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, I want all of that too. As Marcus slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger, and the girls erupted in cheers and happy chatter, he realized that his definition of success had been completely transformed. The business empire he had built seemed insignificant compared to the family he had found, and the future stretching out before them looked more valuable than any fortune he could have accumulated. 3 months later, on a crisp December morning just 2 weeks before Charlotte's 9th birthday, Marcus and Sarah were married in the backyard of their house. Not the small blue house where their journey had begun, but the larger home they had chosen together, with enough bedrooms for everyone and a yard big enough for the elaborate playground Marcus had insisted on installing. Charlotte, in her role as maid of honor, held baby Zoe during the ceremony, while Mia, her cast finally removed, served as ring bearer with the serious concentration she brought to all important tasks. The guest list was small but meaningful. Dr. Harrison, Officer Rodriguez, Mrs. Peterson, and a few close friends who had supported them through their unconventional path to becoming a family. As they exchanged vows that they had written together, promising not just to love each other but to continue growing and learning and communicating honestly, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that blazing summer afternoon when a scared little girl had called 911 about a stranger in a fancy car. Now he knew that the stranger had been him. Not because he was unknown to Charlotte, but because he had been a stranger to the most important parts of himself. He had found his family, his purpose, and his heart all in the same moment, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure none of them ever doubted how much they meant to him. The little girl who had once called for help from a stranger had taught him that sometimes the greatest success comes from being needed, being trusted, and being brave enough to love without reservation. And as Charlotte stood beside them, beaming with pride at the family they had built together, Marcus knew that their story was really just beginning.